Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that the quiet little rituals of a family can be a better measuring stick for a man's heart than any staged conversation, and that sometimes the loudest proof of devotion is the simple, unglamorous answer to a question you didn't expect to ask. That was the premise behind the test Dani and Chelsea Dupree had cooked up, not a formal interrogation, not a trap so much as a casual squeeze to see what would come out. They called it a survey because it made them feel clever and because it looked harmless on paper, a few little prompts about values. A few probes about what a man would do when things got difficult. When Carlton walked into the Dupree's sunroom that late Saturday afternoon, a man whose smile had the confidence of someone who had been taught to read rooms and a softness around the eyes that suggested he had practiced gentleness, he had no idea he was stepping into a tiny, domestic inquisition. Dani and Chelsea sat across from him with iced tea, the sunlight catching little gold motes in the hair of the plants on the windowsill, and launched into what was meant to be conversational curiosity but felt, to them, like something more like a lie detector. Carlton was easy company. He leaned forward when they spoke, an attentive posture that made Chelsea's heart unclench for the first time in weeks. Dani watched him, cataloging each nuance. She had a habit of watching people as if she were reading their future from the way their hands moved. The questions began as practiced smiles do, light, insinuating, designed to put him at ease. "What would you do if Nicole felt overwhelmed?" Chelsea asked, soft, because she could be gentle when she wanted to disarm. "If the kids were acting up and the bills were late, and her mother was being herself?" Dani added, letting her voice go just a shade sharp to test him. Carlton didn't blink. He set his cup down in a deliberate gesture and met them both. "I'd be there. I'd listen first. I'd carry grocery bags and call the contractor. I'd apologize if I needed to. Honestly, I'd probably worry too much and tell her it would be okay even if I wasn't sure." He smiled then, and the simplicity of the answer, the absence of grand gestures or performative heroics, landed like a small, steadying rock in both women's chests. It wasn't what Dani or Chelsea expected. They had rehearsed visions, a dramatic pledge, wide-eyed declarations, some macho demonstration of loyalty. Carlton's answer was domestic and quiet and real, and it cut through the theatricality they'd prepared. He was not flashy, he was practical. He had, without realizing it, ticked off the most important things on their checklist: presence, humility, a willingness to be ordinary with someone who mattered. "So you'd never leave?" Dani threw the bluntness at him like a gauntlet, but there was mischief in it too. The kind of mischief you use to coax the truth out of someone. "No," Carlton said without drama. "I don't know the point of being with someone if you don't plan to be the person they wake up to. Nicole is the person I want to be there for. I wouldn't be anywhere else." He laughed then, low and sincere. There was an absence of the performative vagueness that often came with questions about commitment. He made his position simple and solid. Dani felt the little knot inside her chest loosen, and Chelsea's features softened. The two women shared a look that carried histories, the nights they'd stayed up worrying, the whispered conversations about men like Ted, the well-meaning but timid neighbor who never quite put his courage where his mouth was. Dani had always been good at the barbed joke, the wry observation that did not soften easily. She looked at Carlton and let herself be indulgent, making a joke to deflate the nerves. "I like him more than the cowardly lion over there," she said, gesturing toward where Ted sometimes lingered in the doorway of the kitchen when he came by to borrow tools. It brought a round of laughter that felt sincere and not patronizing. Over the next hour the survey continued in low-key fashion: what he thought of family, of children, of nights when life felt smaller than it was supposed to be. He told small stories about his childhood, about a mother who believed in doing the dishes right and a father who taught him to say sorry when he was wrong. The stories weren't curated for charm, they were small ballast, and Chelsea and Dani felt their weariness melt away. When he spoke about Nicole, his words had the tremor of someone who valued the everyday miracle of another person choosing them, day after day. That, more than anything, seemed to win them over. Later, when the Dupree women gathered in Claire's kitchen, the house hummed with the kind of domestic chaos that made neighborhoods feel lived in: the distant clink of the dishwasher, a lawnmower somewhere beyond the privacy fence. Nicole, who had taken on the role of the pragmatic sister, folded her hands and looked at Dani as if ready to reprimand. "You moved fast," she said, not unkindly, the accusation wrapped in fond exasperation. She could see what people couldn't: how the quickness of Dani's marriage with Andre, the decisive sweep of a ceremony followed by honeymoon photos and a house full of boxes, might appear like a leap taken on a moment's whim. Dani laughed it off with a practiced ease, but there was the shadow of something else behind the smile. "I didn't mean to rush," she said. "It just felt right." Chelsea, who had the sharper emotional antenna of the three, watched both of them. She had been the one to sit with Nicole during the months when their mother had retreated into herself, and she had been the one to watch their lives tilt, to keep a ledger of hurts and comforts. Bill had his theories, the soup of suspicion that always seemed to float around him. Perhaps he thought Dani had been running from something, or towards the kind of stability he couldn't offer. Chelsea, who loved blunt honesty even when it hurt, surprised herself by admitting aloud that she was actually happy to see their mother, Nicole, living and laughing with Andre again. "I'm glad Mom is alive inside again," Chelsea said, and there was heat in the words. "I didn't think I'd see her this way after all that. But I didn't expect it to be so loud." Not loud in the pejorative sense, but loud in ways that made the neighbors raise their eyebrows and sent gossip like birds chittering across a wire. Chelsea's mouth tugged at the memory of the wedding reception where music had vibrated through the floor and Andre had danced like a man who wanted everyone to know he cherished Nicole. Nicole softened. "People say things," she murmured. "You know how it goes." But Dani looked content. Dani sat back, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I'm content," she said, and believed it in that moment. But belief is a fragile thing. Inside her there remained a little map with a faded square labeled Bill. The square wasn't exactly a ghost, nor was it a secret altar. It was simply a history that didn't fold up neatly. Bill had been a presence, long conversations on the porch, that easy banter that had become part of her evening routine. There had been comfort there, and an intimacy that sometimes masquerades as inevitability. That the square still existed didn't mean she wanted to return to it, but it meant that vows, even newly spoken ones, were not instant erasers. Chelsea, who could be blunt about the arithmetic of life, watched her sister with an almost clinical concern. "Do you mean what you said?" Chelsea asked, not to provoke but to check the ledger. "Do you really mean it, Dani? That you'll keep the promises you made?" Dani let out a breath like someone trying to steady a boat. "I meant them," she said, and the truth felt necessarily complicated. "I meant them in that moment with Andre. I love him. He's kind and steady and he makes me laugh in ways I forgot were possible." "But didn't everyone say that people are allowed to be complicated? That love isn't always neat?" Chelsea, always the practical one despite the sarcasm, pushed a little. "Promises were meant to be more than feeling, Dani. Vows are the scaffolding when the feeling gets messy." The words landed with a weight of someone who has seen too many promises bent into pretzels. Dani's eyes flicked toward the window, to the street where neighbors walked their dogs and life stored itself in harmless routines. She pictured Bill's face, his patience, his clumsy attempts at poetry, the way he once left a note on her car windshield when he thought she was running late. She could feel the tug of a memory, perhaps a kiss that happened before either of them had fully named it, an element of youth that clung to them. The memory didn't mean a betrayal, it meant that the human heart sometimes keeps several threads tied to different hands. While Dani navigated the soft, dangerous country between loyalty and desire, their circle murmured with other matters. Chelsea, who had an anxious kind of perceptive energy, had been keeping watch over Kat and Tomas. Where Dani's story was about the future, Kat's was about the present, messy, immediate, and built on a series of choices that threatened to collapse into consequence. Kat's insistence that she loved Tomas had an almost defiant tone. Tomas, for his part, had made mistakes a night with Eva that had been less a romance than a slip, and yet Kat had chosen forgiveness with the violent certainty of someone determined to make a relationship work even if it meant blinders. The other women had tried reason, the sort of patient counsel friends give when they see someone wedging a fragile heart into a pair of worn shoes. "You'll break," Nicole had warned once, in that soft, sisterly way that meant more than protection. You can't keep being the only one to bend. Kat's shrug was almost a physical shield. I still love him, she would say, as if the mere repetition of that sentence could make it true. She would close her eyes as she said it, and the way her lips formed the words suggested she was trying to will herself into the certainty of it. Thomas, meanwhile, was a study in contradictions, affectionate in private, careless in judgment. He apologized with an ease that sometimes felt like a practiced recovery rather than contrition. He would kiss her and then act surprised when insecurity came like tide. The night they were discovered, if discovered was the right word for what happened, the county club hummed with a late summer lethargy. The equipment room was not meant to be romantic. It smelled faintly of motor oil and the bleached sterility of disinfectant wipes. The light was a dead bulb that hummed and threw a pool of harsh yellow over the exercise mats. They had chosen it for its absurdity. It was that combination of poor lighting and privacy that made it feel like a stolen moment. The kind that is dangerous only because Cupid was on sabbatical and common sense was left at the front desk. Kat had arrived there breathless, half laughing at the recklessness of it all. Thomas had that lazy grin that often preceded his best justifications. If anyone asks, he whispered, the cliché of it making her smile, we were looking for a lost dumbbell. Kat laughed, and the sound moved through the cramped space, ricocheting off of exercise bands and a folding table. Thomas moved toward her with the awkward intimacy of someone who had once been a best friend and now wanted to be more. They kissed, clumsy and fierce, and for a moment the world shrank to the blunt edges of their agreement, to forgive, to forget, to remain folded into this pocket of private time. There was a recklessness to Kat in those moments, not bravado so much as a surrender to want. I can't wait to go home, she breathed, voice feathered with something like hope. I just can't wait to be with you, without everything else. Thomas's hand stilled for a second, a shadow crossing his face. If we get caught, it'll look bad, he said, the practical voice of someone who knew consequences but had a weakness for the immediate. For once Kat didn't care about the optics. I don't care, she said, and there was a hunger in the refusal that shone more of despair than liberation. They did it then, in the way two people who have rehearsed each other's lines for months will sometimes do, with the mechanical certainty of those who are hiding from the truth they both already know. Thomas's guilt and Kat's denial braided together into a pattern that would soon, inevitably, unravel. There was a thickness after, a quiet left in the wake of the moans and the dull thump of their hearts finding one another. It was in that quiet that a cleaner, older presence put his hand on the doorknob. A maintenance worker, calloused hands smelling of grease and a phone in his hip pocket, had been walking the hallway checking the HVAC units. He heard the muffled sound first, the human noise that is easy to misread and harder to ignore. He paused at the doorway, a professional's curiosity pricking at him. It took less than a minute to catch sight of two silhouettes wrapped in one another through the sliver of space when the door shifted on its hinge. He heard a laugh slip out, high and intimate, and then silence. The maintenance worker, the sort who had seen every kind of indiscretion in the service corridors of the club, had made a mental note and then left again as if he had seen nothing. But the mind is a leaky vessel. Surprises are like sand. He could tell a story later, or he might tell no one at all. The fact that he could have been the fulcrum of revelation was its own kind of suspense. Afterwards, Nicole and Chelsea offered a council of sisters to Kat like a kind of intervention disguised as coffee. They suggested, gently and then with increasing firmness, that she consider finding someone else, someone whose name didn't come wrapped in the same set of compromises. They spoke in a motherly tone that tried to be pragmatic. You deserve better, Chelsea said, the sentence falling with a weight of conviction. Don't tie your life to someone who treats you like an option. Kat's eyes darted like fish navigating a small net. I know, she said, and you could feel the tautness in the syllables. I know. But knowing and doing are two different continents, and she was not ready to move. Her resolve had the brittleness of band-aids applied to deeper wounds. There was one practical detail that fluttered through the conversation like a small, dark bird, the absence of protection that night. It was something that made even the most casual listener lean forward. Thomas had been distracted, he had been blank and apologetic, then apologetic in a way that sounded rehearsed. Kat, who had always clung to the theatricality of romantic surrender, laughed it off at first. "It was a mistake," she said. "It won't happen again." But the biology of choices is indifferent to promises. In the weeks that followed, there was a small, private calendar where dates were circled and thoughts turned inward. They went about their lives with the fragile optimism of people who have decided to pretend an uncertainty away. Dani continued to wake up beside Andre and make toast with butter and talk about wallpaper choices. Nicole arranged flowers and listened to wind chimes. Chelsea took afternoons to volunteer at the library, letting herself be steadied by the routines. Bill, who had been a quiet presence in the background, watched Dani with the patience of someone who means to understand before he acts. He had instincts that had saved him before, the capacity to be a steady anchor when storms came. But under the placid surface of their days, currents ran. Secrets have the peculiar property of being both weightless and dense. They can be hidden in a sock drawer and weigh like an anchor. The maintenance worker's glance, the evidence of a room left in disarray, the late-night phone messages, each was a small ingredient in a stew that, left to simmer, would grow pungent. Dani felt the pull of an unresolved square in her heart. Kat felt the quickening of a possibility and the simultaneous dread of what it could mean. Chelsea sharpened into protectiveness, like a hawk circling when it senses the field below is ripe for danger. The town, with its small eyes and longer memories, whispered as towns do. Conversations at the grocery store lined up and folded into each other like laundry, harmless until someone thought to rearrange the pile. Rumors moved like small storms across porches. A neighbor saw Tomas at a bar at odd hours. A friend of a friend mentioned a figure leaving the club in a hurry. Each observation alone was nothing. Together, they gathered into pressure, like steam under a lid. At night, when the house settled and the ordinary noises of living fell away, Dani found herself thinking of Bill, of Carlton, of vows, of the kind of ordinary cruelty and ordinary grace that built and unmade lives. She could feel, with a clarity that frightened her, the sense that something important was being held in balance. It was a simple, human scale, not cosmic, not destiny, but the scale of choices that define the kinds of mornings you wake up to. She found herself staring at the framed vow card on the mantel where Andre had stood the night of their wedding, words about fidelity and partnership curling on neat script. The words looked noble and heavy and utterly dependent on the small daily acts that follow them. Outside, the club's shutters banged in a sudden gust of wind, and somewhere in the house Chelsea let out a small laugh that sounded more like a sigh. The maintenance worker walked back to his truck, phone in pocket, decisions crossing his face in quick, unremarkable flashes as he weighed whether to mention what he'd heard. In a way that felt medieval and modern all at once, the fate of these relationships seemed to hinge on the smallest of human acts, the choice to speak or not. The choice to honor a vow or to let a lingering memory name a new future, the choice to take responsibility for a consequence that might rearrange everything. And so the delicate machinery of the Dupree household hummed on, each person moving with imperfect grace through the self-same rooms where loyalty and longing kept meeting like two travelers who could not decide whether to share a path or go their separate ways. No one yet knew the full cost of those choices. Only that the ledger was filling and that time, as it tends to do, was preparing to reconcile accounts. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and the promise of rain, and the small lights in the windows of neighboring houses looked like watchful eyes waiting for the next turn.